I spent months falling hopelessly in love with the world's most awkwardly attractive businessman. Which sounds romantic. It wasn't. It was confusing. Deeply confusing. Hi, I'm Leo Hart. Exactly 1 year ago, I was just an ordinary bakery employee. I made cinnamon rolls, apologized to automatic doors when I walked into them, and somehow developed a completely unreasonable crush on a customer who looked like he stepped out of a billion-dollar watch advertisement. He blushed every time I complimented him, opened every door for me, treated dates like they were historical events, and somehow convinced me that black SUVs, mysterious warehouses, armed security, and a giant man named Marco, who allegedly worked in human resources, were all perfectly normal. In my defense, he was ridiculously pretty enough to temporarily disable my survival instincts. Now, if all of that sounds completely insane, that's because you accidentally started with part 2. I'd highly recommend watching part 1 first. Trust me, it'll make this disaster infinitely funnier. Caught up? Good. Because what happened next completely changed our story, not just the romance. Everything. Because whatever was happening, it was serious. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls. 17. Now, generally speaking, 17 missed calls means one of 3 things. Option 1, someone died. Option 2, your bank discovered a crime. Option 3, your friends found out something embarrassing. I checked the caller ID, Marco. Every single missed call was Marco, which immediately raised several questions. Mainly, why does human resources need me this badly? I called him back. The phone connected instantly, like he'd been waiting. Which honestly, terrifying. Leo, Marco, we need you. Silence. I blinked. Need me for what? A pause, then. The boss is being difficult. The boss, not Julian, the boss. Interesting, suspicious. Corporate language. Very corporate. I rubbed my eyes. What happened? Silence. Then Marco sighed, the deep, exhausted sigh of a man who had seen things. 3 men are currently tied to chairs. I sat upright, immediately. At the time, I still had no idea these people were criminals. None. Zero. My brain interpreted this information in the worst possible way. Oh my God, Marco sighed again. I know. Julian started another team-building exercise. Silence. Silence stretched. What? I nodded confidently. The immersive experiences. The what? The warehouse events. Leo. The escape room thing. Please understand. I genuinely believed this. At this point I was fully committed. I had built an entire narrative, a complete storyline, a cinematic universe. Julian owned warehouses. Warehouses hosted events. Events needed actors. Actors got tied to chairs. Perfectly logical. Flawless reasoning. Marco sounded like he was physically aging on the phone. Finally he muttered, "Just come." An hour later, I arrived at what I believed was a warehouse. Calling it a warehouse was generous. This thing looked like a supervillain headquarters. Huge. Industrial. Intimidating. There were black SUVs everywhere. Men in suits standing outside. Several of them wearing sunglasses indoors. Indoors? The universal sign of bad decisions. I parked, grabbed my coffee, and marched inside, because at this point I genuinely believed I was helping with workplace conflict resolution. God, I miss being stupid. Life was simpler then. The second I entered, people started moving. Fast. Very fast. Doors opened. People stepped aside. Conversation stopped. Looking back, this should have been suspicious. Extremely suspicious. At the time, I assumed everybody was just polite, because apparently I had never met reality before. Then Marco appeared. The giant man looked exhausted. Actually exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes. Hair slightly messy. The expression of a man reconsidering his career choices. Leo. Marco. Thank God. Thank God. Human Resources was thanking me. This company was clearly struggling. I patted his arm sympathetically. Rough day? Marco looked toward a distant room, then back at me, then toward the room again. You have no idea. As we walked through the building, I noticed something. Everyone seemed nervous. Not normal nervous. Not workplace nervous. Not deadline nervous. Terrified nervous. One guy dropped a stack of papers when he saw me. Another practically sprinted out of my way. A third whispered, "He's here." I thought I was witnessing office drama. Like maybe everybody knew I was dating the boss. Maybe there were workplace rumors. Maybe people were gossiping. The actual explanation was much funnier, but I wouldn't learn that for months. Then we reached a large conference room. And audience? Chaos. Pure chaos. Men arguing, phones ringing, maps spread across tables, people shouting. Someone had apparently punched a wall. Corporate America was not doing well. I walked inside. Immediately, the room went silent, instantly silent, like somebody hit pause. Every head turned toward me. Every single one. I froze. Hello? Nobody spoke. Marco cleared his throat. He'll fix it. Excuse me? I'll fix what? The room collectively relaxed, like I'd arrived carrying a miracle. I looked around, completely confused. Why are you all looking at me? One guy answered immediately. Because you're the only person he listens to. Silence. I blinked. Then blinked again. Then laughed. A reasonable response. Except nobody else laughed. Not one person. That's when the first tiny crack appeared in my understanding of reality. The first little voice whispering, "Leo, something is weird." Very weird. Then a loud crash echoed from somewhere deeper in the building. Everybody jumped. Everyone jumped. One guy crossed himself. Another muttered a prayer. Marco closed his eyes, slowly, painfully. Like a man preparing for battle, I pointed toward the noise. "What was that?" Marco sighed. "The boss. I was about to discover something important. Not the Mafia thing. Not yet. Something arguably more shocking. Julian? The calm one? The polite one? The gentleman who opened car doors? The man who blushed when complimented? Apparently had anger issues. And trust me, the sight waiting behind that next door was unlike anything I'd imagined. Because the second I walked in, I found Julian standing in the middle of absolute destruction. And audience? The man looked one inconvenience away from committing several felonies. The second I walked through that door, I stopped. Not dramatically. Not because I was scared. Because my brain genuinely needed a second to process what I was seeing. Imagine walking into a room and discovering somebody lost a fight against furniture. That was the scene. A massive oak table had been flipped over. 3 chairs were broken. Actual broken. Not damaged. Broken. One had somehow become 2 separate chairs. There was shattered glass on the floor. A lamp was hanging sideways. And directly in the center of the destruction stood Julian. Now, normally Julian looked like the cover model for a luxury watch advertisement. Calm, elegant, composed. This version looked like the luxury watch advertisement had developed anger issues. His suit jacket was gone. His sleeves were rolled up. His hair was slightly messy. And his jaw was clenched so hard I thought he might crack a tooth. The man looked one inconvenience away from becoming the inconvenience. Nobody in the room was speaking. Nobody. A dozen terrifying men in expensive suits stood around the edges of the room looking. Deeply uncomfortable. One guy was pretending to study a map. Another was staring at a wall. A third seemed fascinated by the floor. Nobody wanted eye contact. Nobody wanted attention. Nobody wanted to be perceived. Then Julian noticed me. And audience? The transformation was immediate. Instant. Like somebody flipped a switch. The terrifying version vanished. Gone. His shoulders relaxed. His expression softened. His entire face changed. The room collectively exhaled. The room exhaled. I heard it. Several grown men released breaths they had apparently been holding for minutes. I pointed. "Wow." Julian blinked. "What?" I pointed at the destroyed furniture. "You guys had a really intense brainstorming session?" Silence. A painful amount of silence. Marco pinched the bridge of his nose. One man quietly turned away. Julian stared at me, then rubbed a hand across his face. "Something like that. Something like that." Another clue. Another giant clue. Ignored immediately. I walked further inside, stepped over broken glass, looked around, then spotted a giant hole in the drywall. A giant hole. Human-sized. I pointed. "Oh." Julian followed my gaze. "Yes. That is not OSHA compliant." "Silence," one guy snorted. Then immediately pretended he hadn't. I turned back toward Julian. Now that I was closer, I noticed something else. The man looked exhausted. Not physically exhausted. Emotionally exhausted. Like he'd spent the last 3 hours arguing with people. Which, as it turned out, he had. I softened instantly, because no matter how dramatic he looked, I hated seeing him upset. "What happened?" Julian opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I have never seen a human being struggle so hard to explain something. Finally, "Work." I nodded. Corporate nonsense, of course. The natural enemy of happiness. What kind of work? A pause, long pause. The kind of pause that should have concerned me. It was a disagreement. I looked around the room, at the broken chairs, the shattered glass, the hole in the wall, then back at him. With the furniture, somebody choked. Actually choked. I turned. One of the suited men was coughing violently into his fist. Marco was staring at the ceiling. Julian closed his eyes, slowly, like a man asking the universe for patience. Then he looked back at me. It was a stressful meeting. I nodded sympathetically. "That explains the table." "It does?" "Absolutely," I pointed. "That table knew what it did." The coughing got worse. One man physically left the room. Then something strange happened. Julian stepped closer. Not much, just enough, and immediately the room got weird. The room got really weird because every single person suddenly found a reason to leave. One guy checked his watch. Another grabbed a folder. A third remembered an urgent appointment. Within 30 seconds the room had emptied by half. I watched them go, confused. Do they all hate meetings this much? Marco made a sound. Not a laugh. Not a cough. Some third mysterious thing. Then walked out before I could ask questions. Coward. Absolute coward. The second he left, Julian looked even more exhausted. I frowned. "You're stressed." "I'm fine." Classic lie. The most universal lie in human history. Right beside. "I'm 5 minutes away." And I read the terms and conditions. I crossed my arms. "You're not fine." "I'm fine." "Julian." "Leo." "Julian." "Leo." We stared at each other. A battle of wills, an ancient ritual, neither willing to surrender. Finally I won, because obviously, Julian sighed. Long, slow, defeated. I've had a difficult day. There it was, progress. I stepped closer, much closer, then reached up and straightened his tie. The effect was immediate. Julian froze. Completely, like somebody had unplugged him. Interesting. I adjusted the knot, smoothed the collar. Then looked up. His eyes were locked entirely on me. Not moving, not blinking, just watching. Dangerous, extremely dangerous. My heart immediately started acting stupid. Again. Better. His voice came out quieter than before. Thank you. That should not have been attractive. It was. Very attractive. I hated that. Then I noticed something sitting on the conference table, a stack of paperwork. Massive stack, huge stack, dozens and dozens of pages. I walked over, picked one up, and immediately gasped. Oh no. Julian stiffened. What? I turned toward him, horrified. Your filing system is terrible. The room somehow became even quieter. I looked around, at the folders, the paperwork, the sticky notes, the complete chaos. Then back at Julian. You people operate like raccoons. Silence. I continued. Who organized this? Nobody answered. I pointed at the mess. This isn't a filing system. Still silence. This is a cry for help. One guy whispered. I told them. Another whispered. Shut up. I had accidentally discovered their weakness. Administration, not law enforcement. Not rival gangs, spreadsheets. The Mafia's greatest enemy was Microsoft Excel. And trust me, what happened next was the beginning of the end. Because the moment I started fixing their paperwork, I accidentally became indispensable. And once that happened, there was absolutely no escape. The paperwork started innocently. That's how every disaster starts. Innocently. One moment you're organizing folders. The next moment you're accidentally restructuring a criminal empire. I didn't know that at the time. I thought I was helping a struggling corporation. A very weird corporation. A corporation with an alarming number of scars. But still, a corporation. The first mistake happened when I organized 3 filing cabinets. The second mistake happened when I created color-coded labels. The third mistake happened when I introduced spreadsheets. And audience? That third one changed everything. Because apparently nobody in this organization knew what Excel was. I'm serious. I wish I was joking. These people could coordinate international operations, track shipments across continents, manage millions of dollars. But conditional formatting, wizardry, absolute wizardry. I was sitting in the conference room one afternoon reorganizing reports when Marco walked in. The giant man stopped, looked at my laptop, looked at me, then looked back at the laptop. What is that? A spreadsheet. Silence. A what? A what? I stared. Marco stared back. Neither of us moved. Finally, I turned the screen toward him. See? I pointed. Red means problem. Marco nodded. Okay. Green means good. Marco nodded again. Okay. Yellow means maybe. A pause, then. That's incredible. Incredible. The man looked genuinely impressed, like I'd invented electricity, like I'd cured disease, like I'd personally solved world hunger. I was teaching colors. The door opened. Another employee entered, then another, then another. Soon 6 fully grown men were standing around my laptop staring at the spreadsheet. One whispered, How did he do that? Another whispered, I don't know. A third whispered, The colors change automatically. The colors. I was apparently the most powerful wizard in the building. Within a week, things got worse. People started bringing me problems. Constantly. Endlessly. Relentlessly. At first it was small things, scheduling conflicts, inventory reports, budget issues. Then somehow it escalated. One afternoon a man I'd never met sat across from me and said, We have a dispute. Normal sentence. Normal words. Nothing suspicious. I folded my hands professionally. Okay. He pointed toward another man. We disagree. I nodded. About what? Silence. The first guy looked at the second guy. The second guy looked at the first guy. Then the first guy said, Territory. Pause. Territory. A weird word. A very weird word. A word that should have triggered something. Anything, my response. Oh, I nodded. Sales regions. The room went silent. Then both men immediately nodded. Exactly. Sales regions. Years later I learned they were arguing about actual organized crime territory. At the time, I thought they sold luxury watches. Maybe handbags. I don't know. The point is, I grabbed a map, drew a line, created a rotation schedule, and accidentally solved a gang dispute. Then everybody acted like I was a genius. It was deeply concerning. Meanwhile, Julian watched all of this happen with increasing disbelief. Every day I'd arrive. Every day somebody needed something. Every day I'd solve another ridiculous problem. And every day Julian looked more confused. One afternoon he found me teaching 3 men how calendars worked. Actual calendars. One of them had missed 3 meetings because he thought next Thursday meant tomorrow. I was losing my mind. Julian stood in the doorway, watching, quiet, beautiful, dangerously beautiful, and smiling, that stupid smile, the one reserved exclusively for me. Eventually he walked over. The room instantly cleared. Everybody vanished, like smoke, like magic, like they feared being perceived. Interesting. Julian sat beside me, close, not touching, never touching the menace. You've become very popular. I looked around, at the empty room, then back at him. I think your employees need help. The expression on his face, good Lord. The man looked like he was fighting for his life. Then he laughed, a real laugh. Warm, soft, genuine, and just like that I forgot what we were discussing. Again, this man was a public safety hazard. A few days later Julian invited me to a company event. Those words should terrify you. They terrify me now. At the time, I thought, networking, professional development, maybe a retreat, maybe trust exercises, maybe a corporate picnic. What I got instead was a shooting range. An actual shooting range. The moment we arrived, I stopped walking, then looked at the building. Then at Julian. Then back at the building. Then Julian again. Corporate retreat? A pause. Yes. Interesting. Another pause. Very. The man wasn't even trying anymore. There were men carrying cases, security everywhere, a giant sign featuring enough safety warnings to start a legal department, and somehow I still didn't figure it out. Then Marco appeared, wearing ear protection, looking completely at home, which honestly should have answered every question. Instead, I smiled. HR really does everything. Marco stared at me, the same way one might stare at a haunted painting, then looked toward the sky. Again, his favorite hobby, praying for patience. And audience, trust me. The shooting range is where things start getting really suspicious, because what happened there should have blown my entire theory apart. Instead, I somehow made everything worse. The shooting range should have answered every question, every single one. It should have solved the mystery, ended the confusion, wrapped everything up neatly. Instead, it somehow made me dumber. I don't know how. I genuinely don't. But somehow I looked directly at reality and chose denial. The second we entered, a man handed me safety glasses. Reasonable. Then another man handed me ear protection. Also reasonable. Then another man handed me a gun. A gun, an actual gun. Not a prop, not a replica, not a training device, a real gun. I stared at it, then at Julian, then at the gun, then Julian again. Corporate retreat. Julian froze. Marco walked away immediately, actually turned around and walked away, the coward. I looked back at Julian. Your company is intense. A pause. Yes. Very committed to team building. Very. The man had completely given up trying to explain things. Now here's the embarrassing part. I was weirdly good at it. Not amazing, not action movie good, but surprisingly competent. The first shot hit the target. The second shot hit the target. The third shot got pretty close. Meanwhile, everyone around me looked shocked. Actually shocked. One guy lowered his binoculars. Another whispered something. A third crossed his arms and stared. I looked at Julian. Why are they looking at me? His lips twitched. They're impressed. By what? A pause. You. Dangerous answer. Very dangerous answer. Because Julian had started doing this thing, this terrible thing, the thing where he looked proud, not romantic, not flirtatious, proud, and somehow that affected me more. An hour later, everybody was relaxing in a lounge area overlooking the range. People were talking, laughing, eating. For the first time, Julian's employees actually looked normal. Well, almost normal. One guy still had a visible scar, another looked like he'd won a knife fight, but progress is progress. I was sitting beside Julian when I overheard two men talking. The shipment arrived. Good. The South Territory issue is handled. Finally. Pause. Shipment. Territory. Again, those words. Those suspicious words. They were everywhere. I frowned, then looked at Julian, then looked back at the men, then back at Julian. For one brief moment. One glorious moment. My brain started working. Something wasn't adding up. Something felt off. Something felt. Then Julian handed me a cookie. A cookie. And just like that, the thought disappeared. Gone. Destroyed. Murdered. My investigative instincts had been defeated by baked goods. As the afternoon wound down, most people headed home. Eventually, it was just me, Julian, and Marco. The three of us standing outside as the sun began to set. The parking lot was quiet, peaceful, comfortable. Then Marco looked at Julian, then at me, then back at Julian. The giant man sighed, deeply, like a father disappointed in his children. Tell him. Everything stopped. Julian immediately tensed. Marco folded his arms. Tell him. My eyes moved between them, confused. Tell me what? Nobody answered. Interesting. Marco looked at Julian. Julian looked at the ground. For the first time since I'd met him, Julian looked nervous. Actually nervous. Not flustered. Not shy. Nervous. And suddenly my stomach tightened, because whatever this was, it mattered. A lot. Marco finally shook his head. You're running out of time. Then he walked away, just left, got into his SUV. Drove off. The man dropped a dramatic line and disappeared into the sunset. Who does that? Apparently Marco. The ride home was quiet. Not awkward quiet. Heavy quiet. The kind where both people are thinking. The kind where something important is sitting between them. I looked out the window, then over at Julian, then back out the window. Finally, tell me what? His grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. a small movement. But I noticed. A long silence followed, then another, then another. Finally, Julian said, "There's something I should have told you a long time ago." There it was. The moment. The beginning of the end. Because whatever secret he'd been hiding, whatever explanation connected the warehouses, the suspicious employees, the shootings, the territories, the shipments, the giant security teams, I was finally about to hear it, and trust me, not even my wildest theories came close to the truth. The drive home felt different, not bad, not awkward, just different, like a movie right before the plot twist, the kind where the audience already knows something terrible is coming. Meanwhile, the main character is still smiling. I was the main character, unfortunately, and I had absolutely no idea what was happening. The city lights passed outside the window. Julian stayed quiet. I stayed quiet for almost 5 full minutes, which was impressive, because I normally talk the way a machine gun works. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Okay," Julian glanced over. "Okay, let's do this." A pause. "Do what?" "Your secret." Silence. The man's jaw tightened. "Interesting," I pointed dramatically. "You have one." "Leo, you absolutely have one." Another pause. Then, "What makes you think that?" "Excuse me, what makes me think that?" "What makes me think that?" I started counting on my fingers. "You own warehouses." Silence. "You have suspiciously intense employees." Silence. "You apparently solve workplace disagreements with tactical formations." Silence. "Your HR department looks like it invades small countries for fun." A muscle twitched in Julian's cheek. I continued. "You own approximately 17 black vehicles. You disappear at weird hours. You answer phone calls like a movie villain. You have enough security to protect a small nation." The man didn't even try denying it. Not once. That should have worried me. Instead, it motivated me, because now I was investigating. And audience. This investigation went very badly. My first theory was tax fraud. I know, but hear me out. It felt plausible. Rich people commit tax crimes all the time. I folded my arms. "Nah." Julian blinked. "What?" "It's not tax fraud." A pause. "I didn't say it was." "Exactly." "What?" "You would have denied it." Silence, I pointed. "The fact that you're confused means I'm wrong." I felt brilliant. Sherlock Holmes, Batman, Nancy Drew, all combined. Julian looked exhausted. Theory number 2, secret intelligence agency. I was serious, very serious. I sat upright. "Oh my God." Julian closed his eyes, slowly, painfully. "No." "You work for the government." "No." "You absolutely work for the government." "Leo?" "The security." "No." "The warehouses." "No." "The mysterious phone calls." "No." "The dramatic entrances." I was making excellent points. Julian disagreed, incorrectly. Then I gasped. A real gasp. The kind old ladies do in soap operas. "Oh my God." Julian looked terrified. "What now?" "Witness protection." "What?" "That's it." At this point I was freewheeling. No brakes, no supervision, pure chaos. I pointed at him. "You were a witness." "No." "You testified." "No." "Against somebody." "No." "You have a new identity." "No." "The warehouses are safe houses." "No." "The SUVs are protection." "No." "The employees are bodyguards." "No." The more he denied it, the more convinced I became, which, looking back, was probably very frustrating. We pulled up outside my apartment building. The car stopped. Neither of us moved. Neither of us got out. The conversation hung there, waiting. Julian stared forward, hands still on the steering wheel, and suddenly, the joking faded. Not completely, just enough. Enough for me to realize this wasn't funny to him. Whatever secret he'd been carrying, it genuinely mattered. I swallowed, then spoke more softly. "Julian." His eyes lifted. "Met mine." "And audience?" There it was again. That look, the one that always ruined me. The one that made me forget every joke, every distraction, every excuse, just that ridiculous amount of affection. Like I was something precious, something worth protecting. And for the first time, I realized how tired he looked. Not physically, emotionally, like he'd been carrying something heavy for a very long time. "I don't care what it is." Silence. "I don't." His expression shifted slightly. I continued. "You know that, right?" The words came out before I could stop them, but they were true. Completely true. The warehouses, the employees, the weirdness, the secrets, none of it mattered. Not really. Because somewhere between the bakery and now, I had fallen completely in love with him. And that was the actual problem. Julian looked away, toward the windshield, toward the city, anywhere except me. Then he laughed, softly. Not because anything was funny. The sad kind, the dangerous kind. You say that now. My stomach dropped, immediately, because that wasn't a joke. That wasn't teasing. That was fear, real fear. And suddenly I understood something. Not the secret. Not yet, but the fear. This whole time I'd assumed Julian was protecting himself. He wasn't. He was protecting me from whatever truth he thought would make me leave. And honestly, that hurt. Because the idiot genuinely believed I would walk away. After everything, the bakery, the dates, the late-night phone calls, the smiles, the almost kisses, all of it. He thought one secret could erase everything. Men are exhausting. I reached across the center console, before I could think, before I could second-guess myself, and placed my hand over his. Pause. Because this was important. This was the first time, the very first time. I initiated contact, and he didn't pull away, didn't freeze, didn't retreat, didn't make an excuse. He just looked down at our hands, then back at me, like he couldn't quite believe it. And neither could I. The silence stretched, warm, comfortable, terrifying. Then I smiled, small, soft. Whatever it is. His eyes stayed on mine. We'll figure it out. I meant it, every word, and trust me, the next 5 minutes would test that promise harder than anything else in this story. Because after months of secrets, months of denial, months of me somehow missing every clue known to mankind, Julian finally decided to tell me the truth. And audience? The first sentence out of his mouth broke my brain. Julian took a breath, a slow one, the kind people take before jumping out of airplanes, or confessing crimes, or telling their boyfriend something catastrophically stupid. Then he looked at me, directly, completely serious, and said, "My family is an organized crime." Silence. Nothing happened. Not because the moment wasn't dramatic, because my brain genuinely failed to process the sentence. I stared. Julian stared back. The city lights sparkled dramatically, and my brain, nothing, absolutely nothing, loading wheel, buffering, no signal. Finally I nodded. Okay. Julian blinked. Okay? Okay. Silence. This was not the response he expected, not remotely. He looked confused, then suspicious, then somehow more nervous. "Leo, yeah? Did you hear what I said?" "Of course." "What did I say?" "Easy." I smiled. "Your family owns a very successful company." Julian closed his eyes. Immediately, the exhausted sigh that escaped him could have powered a small wind farm. "No." At this point, the universe itself was trying to help me, and I was fighting back. "What? We are not a company." I frowned. "Interesting." Then another theory appeared. "Oh." His expression brightened slightly, like maybe understanding had finally arrived. "It's a family business." His head dropped against the steering wheel. Thunk. Actual thunk. The man hit the steering wheel. I watched, concerned. "Are you okay?" "No." "Do you need water?" "No." "Maybe a snack?" "No." Julian sat upright again, slowly, like a man approaching his final battle. Then he tried once more, carefully, deliberately. "We are the Mafia." Pause. "Because I need you to understand exactly what happened next. Nothing. Again. Nothing." The sentence entered one ear, exited the other, and completely missed my brain. I stared, then laughed, out loud. A real laugh, because obviously, the Mafia? In New York? In 2026? What was this? A movie? A video game? A very committed role-playing group? Please. I pointed at him. "Good one." Julian didn't laugh. "Interesting." I waited, still nothing. No smile, no joke, no punchline, no reveal, just silence. For the first time all night, something inside my head started moving. Very slowly, like an old computer booting up. I looked at him, then looked away, then looked back. The loading wheel returned, the warehouses, the SUVs, the security, the shipments, the territories. Marco, the human refrigerator, the HR manager, the man who said he solved complaints with his hands. I blinked, once, then twice, then 3 times. "No." Julian remained silent. I pointed, "No." Still silent, I pointed harder. "No." The puzzle pieces were moving, and I hated it. I hated every second of it, because suddenly things were starting to fit, and I didn't like the picture, the shoulder holster. Julian said nothing. The security guards, nothing. The warehouses, nothing. The family compound, nothing. The hitman in the bakery, nothing. My stomach dropped, a little, just a little, then more, then significantly more, because for the first time, for the very first time, every clue lined up. Perfectly, horribly, perfectly. I stared straight ahead, processing, very slowly, like a man assembling IKEA furniture without instructions. The shooting range, silence. The territories, silence. The mysterious phone calls, silence. The men tied to chairs, silence. Oh my God, the men tied to chairs. I turned so fast I nearly injured myself. The men tied to chairs. Julian winced. "Yes. I thought that was team building." "I know." I slapped both hands over my face, immediately. The second-hand embarrassment was unbearable. The signs had been everywhere, everywhere. I remembered the first bakery encounter. The bleeding, the criminals, the trench coat, the dramatic entrance. He was actually shot. And I called it commitment to the goth aesthetic. I physically folded forward, mortified. Oh my God. Julian watched carefully, clearly waiting for the explosion, the panic, the rejection, the dramatic breakup scene. Instead, I started laughing. I know. But what else was I supposed to do? I had accidentally dated a Mafia prince for months, not days, not weeks, months, and somehow remained completely oblivious. At that point, laughter felt appropriate, necessary even. I laughed harder. Julian looked concerned, then confused, then mildly alarmed. "Leo?" I pointed at him, still laughing. "You told me Marco worked in human resources." A pause. Then, The corner of Julian's mouth twitched, just slightly. I pointed harder. He had a gun. I know. I called it a phone holder. I know. The man actually smiled. The traitor, the absolute traitor. Then the laughter faded, slowly, naturally, until the only thing left was silence. And reality. The real reality. The one I'd spent months avoiding. Julian watched me carefully, like he was preparing for impact. Preparing for goodbye, preparing for me to leave. And that's when it hit me. Not the Mafia part. The fear. The idiot thought this was the end. He genuinely thought I'd walk away. That after all this, after every date, every conversation, every almost kiss, every ridiculous moment, one confession would erase it all. I looked at him. Really looked at him. At the tension in his shoulders, the uncertainty in his eyes, the fear. And suddenly I felt something unexpected. Not anger, not betrayal, annoyance. Pure annoyance. Because he should have known me better than that. Julian. His voice was quiet. Yeah? You're incredibly stupid. Silence. The look on his face. Worth it. Absolutely worth it. And trust me. What happened next is the reason this story eventually ends with me running the most feared criminal organization on the East Coast. Because apparently learning your boyfriend is Mafia royalty is one thing. Meeting his rivals? That's where things get complicated. The silence after I called Julian stupid lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then, for the first time all night, he laughed. A real laugh. Not the polite kind. Not the tiny smile kind. An actual laugh. I need you to understand how rare this was. Julian laughing was basically a solar eclipse. A beautiful natural phenomenon that only occurred under very specific conditions. And apparently one of those conditions was me insulting him. Interesting. His shoulders relaxed. Some of the tension disappeared. And for the first time since the confession, he looked less afraid. Good. Because honestly, I was starting to get offended. The man thought I was going to dump him. Me. The guy who thought a gun holster was a phone accessory. Clearly he had misjudged my standards. You're not leaving. It wasn't a question. The vulnerability in that statement nearly killed me. Not because of what he said. Because of how he said it. Carefully. Like he still wasn't entirely sure. Like he needed confirmation. I rolled my eyes. Immediately. You are so dramatic. A pause. Leo. No. I pointed at him. No. He blinked. What? You don't get to be shocked. Another blink. About what? Julian. I spread my arms. Look at you. Silence. I pointed harder. You literally walked into a bakery looking like a villain in a billion-dollar crime thriller. You were bleeding. You had criminals chasing you. You wore a trench coat. The trench coat, never forget the trench coat. I leaned forward. Honestly, if anything, this is partially your fault. Julian actually looked confused. The audacity. Then something occurred to me. Something important. Very important. The kind of realization that sneaks up on you. The kind that changes everything. I sat back, thinking. Then looked at him, then thought some more, then looked again. Wait. Julian immediately tensed. What? How rich are you? Silence. Critical question. Extremely critical question. The most important question of the evening. Julian stared. I stared back. Nobody moved. Finally, Leo. How rich? A sigh. That isn't important. Oh my God. That is rich person language. That is exactly what rich people say. Nobody else says. That isn't important. Poor people know exactly how much money they have. Down to the cent. Julian was hiding numbers. Big numbers. Dangerous numbers. I pointed accusingly. You own the building, don't you? Silence. I gasped. You own multiple buildings. Julian rubbed his face. I had priorities. The next few days were surprisingly normal. Which sounds strange, because discovering your boyfriend belongs to a criminal empire should theoretically create complications. Instead, things got easier. No more secrets. No more weird explanations. No more pretending Marco worked in human resources. Actually, scratch that. Marco still insisted he worked in human resources. 3 days later, I saw him, pointed at him, and said, "So you're Mafia?" Marco nodded. "Correct," I pointed again. "And not HR." A pause. Then, "I do both. I hate this organization, I really do. The biggest surprise? Nobody treated me differently, at least not at first. The weird respect. The strange attention. The constant offers of food. All of that remained exactly the same. If anything, people seemed relieved. Like some enormous secret had finally been resolved. One afternoon, I walked into headquarters and overheard a conversation. A dangerous thing. Because nobody in this building knew how to whisper, one man looked up, saw me, then immediately elbowed another guy. That's him. Again, that's him. I was beginning to hate those words. The second guy looked over, lowered his voice, then whispered, "The bread guy?" The first guy nodded. The bread guy. I had a reputation, a genuine reputation, and apparently it involved carbohydrates. Then came Don Valentine. Remember that name? Because up until this point my life had been a romantic comedy. Don Valentine was where it briefly became an action movie. The first time I heard the name was during breakfast. Julian was reading reports. I was stealing half his pancakes. A healthy relationship. Then Marco walked in. Which immediately meant bad news. Marco never arrived carrying good news. The giant man looked serious, more serious than usual, which was concerning because his normal expression already looked like a hostage negotiation. Valentine wants a meeting. Silence. The room changed instantly. The atmosphere shifted, not dramatically, subtly, but enough. Enough for me to notice. Julian's expression hardened. Marco folded his arms. Nobody spoke. Interesting. I looked between them. Who's Valentine? Silence. Then Marco answered. Problem. That was it. Problem. Nothing else. Just problem, I pointed. That is the least useful explanation I've ever heard. Marco nodded. Correct. The meeting was scheduled for the following week. And audience? Everybody was nervous. Everybody. Marco was nervous. The advisors were nervous. The security teams were nervous. One guy literally dropped a folder when Valentine was mentioned. I noticed. Of course I noticed. And naturally, I came to the wrong conclusion. Again. Because apparently I never learn. My theory? Corporate merger. Corporate merger. I thought Don Valentine was a rival CEO. Maybe an investor. Maybe a shareholder. Maybe some wealthy jerk trying to buy the company. This theory survived exactly 4 days. Then I accidentally overheard what Valentine was actually demanding. And audience? That was the moment I realized I might be slightly underqualified for my current situation. The moment I overheard the conversation, I knew something was wrong. Not Mafia wrong. Let's be realistic. I still wasn't operating at full intelligence, but definitely wrong. I was walking past a conference room when I heard shouting. Not unusual. People shouted constantly around here. Apparently organized crime involved a surprising amount of yelling. Who knew? Then I heard Marco say, he wants 20%. Silence. Another voice answered, absolutely not. A third voice, it'll start a war. Pause. War? War? That felt excessive, even for corporate negotiations. I slowed down very casually, very subtly, like a spy, a terrible spy. The kind immediately spotted in movies. I pressed myself against the wall, leaned closer, and immediately knocked over a decorative plant. The plant died instantly. The plant and I both knew I wasn't built for espionage. The conference room door opened. Marco stepped outside, looked down at the dead plant, then looked at me. Neither of us spoke. Finally, what are you doing? I pointed at the plant. Investigating. Marco stared. The plant stared. I stared. Nobody won. 5 minutes later, I was sitting inside the meeting because apparently nobody had the energy to stop me anymore. Interesting organizational structure. The room was filled with serious faces, maps, reports, security briefings. The whole thing looked deeply stressful. I scanned the table, then pointed. Why does every meeting here look like you're planning a military invasion? Silence. One advisor muttered. Because technically, Marco kicked him. Hard. The advisor immediately stopped talking. Normal workplace behavior. Very professional. I looked at Julian. Julian looked exhausted. Again, the man spent half his life exhausted because everybody around him was apparently insane, including me, mostly me. Then I saw the file, the Valentine file. Huge, thick, filled with notes, pictures, reports, the kind of folder usually reserved for serial killers or tax audits. Both terrifying. I opened it, started reading. This is where things finally clicked. Not the Mafia thing. We'd already covered that. The leadership thing. The responsibility thing. The pressure thing. Because for the first time, I realized exactly what Julian carried every day. Every problem landed on his desk, every dispute, every threat, every decision, every risk, everything. And suddenly all those exhausted looks made sense. The late-night calls, the stress, the constant responsibility, the weight. I looked across the table. At Julian. At the tired eyes. At the controlled expression. At the man who spent so much energy protecting everyone else. And for the first time, I stopped seeing a Mafia boss. I saw my boyfriend. That realization hit hard. Much harder than the Mafia reveal. Then things got significantly worse, because one of the advisors said, we could give Valentine Brooklyn. Silence. I looked up, confused. Brooklyn, not a building, not a contract. Brooklyn, the borough, the actual borough. I blinked, then blinked again. Can you do that? Silence. Everybody stared at me. I stared back. What? Nobody answered. Interesting, very suspicious. Then Marco rubbed his forehead. The universal gesture for, please stop talking. I ignored him. Naturally. Can you just give away Brooklyn? One advisor looked genuinely confused. Not all of it. Not all of it. I physically stood up. There's a partial option? The room exploded, not literally. Emotionally. Half the people started laughing. One guy nearly fell out of his chair. Another covered his face. Julian pinched the bridge of his nose. Apparently I'd asked a stupid question. Unfortunately, nobody explained why. The actual breakthrough happened 10 minutes later. Because while everyone argued, I noticed something. A pattern. Nobody in this organization knew how to compromise. Nobody. Every proposed solution involved threats, intimidation, counter-threats, more intimidation, then additional intimidation. The entire strategy could be summarized as, what if we threaten them harder? I finally raised my hand, like we were in school. The room slowly quieted. 20 people turned toward me. I immediately regretted everything, but it was too late now. I had attention, the most dangerous substance known to mankind. What if... Silence. What if you just asked him what he actually wants? The room froze, completely. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody even blinked. Finally, Marco frowned. What? I repeated myself, slower. What? Pause. Pause. You asked him. Long pause. What he wants? The silence somehow got worse. Then one advisor said, That's it? I nodded, yeah. Another advisor frowned. You can do that? Excuse me? You can do that? What do you mean, can you do that? It was a conversation, not witchcraft. Julian looked at me, then at the table, then back at me, and suddenly, a smile appeared, slowly, dangerously, the kind that meant I'd accidentally done something important, again, which was becoming a worrying trend. The meeting with Valentine arrived 3 days later. This was it, the big one. The moment everybody had been stressing about, the moment everybody feared, the moment everybody prepared for, and somehow, someway, I was invited, which in hindsight was an incredibly irresponsible decision. Because trust me, the second I met Don Valentine, everything changed. And audience. The legend of the bread guy was about to become significantly more ridiculous. The meeting with Don Valentine took place in a private restaurant overlooking the river. When I say private, I mean private. The kind of place where there are no menus, no walk-ins, no reviews online, no evidence it even exists. The kind of restaurant where rich people commit tax fraud over appetizers. I ride with Julian, Marco, 3 advisors, and enough security to invade a medium-sized nation, which felt excessive. Apparently nobody agreed. The closer we got to the restaurant, the more nervous everybody became. Marco was silent. The advisors were silent. Even Julian seemed tense. This should have worried me. Instead, I assumed Valentine was just incredibly annoying, like a billionaire who sends emails at 2 a.m. The hostess led us into a private dining room. Huge windows, expensive furniture, a table long enough to host a royal wedding. And sitting at the far end was Don Valentine. I expected a supervillain, a crime lord, a terrifying monster. Instead, the man looked like somebody's uncle, a well-dressed uncle, an expensive uncle, but still an uncle. Silver hair, perfect suit, warm smile, the kind of face that should be offering you cookies, not starting wars. I leaned toward Julian, whispered quietly, He looks nice. Julian nearly choked. Marco looked physically injured. One advisor whispered, Oh my God, interesting reaction. Very interesting reaction. Valentine heard me. The old man laughed, then pointed at me. I like him. Silence. The room somehow became even more tense. I smiled politely. Thank you. Valentine grinned. No wonder everybody talks about you. Pause. Everybody. I looked around, then back at him. I'm sorry. The old man leaned back. The bakery boy. Silence. My soul immediately left my body. No, not here. Not now, not internationally. You cannot tell me my reputation has spread. Valentine smiled. The one who chased armed men away with bread. The advisors started coughing. Marco stared at the table. Julian looked suspiciously entertained. I pointed at Valentine. You know about that? The old man laughed again. Everybody knows about that. Everybody. My legacy. My contribution to organized crime. Bread, carbohydrates, baked goods. Fantastic. The meeting started, and immediately I became confused, because everybody was talking in code. Actual code. The entire conversation sounded like a puzzle. We need access. No. We had an agreement. The agreement changed. The territory remains disputed. The territory remains ours. I felt like I'd accidentally joined season 4 of a show without watching seasons 1 through 3. Nobody was explaining anything. Everyone seemed angry. The tension kept rising, minute after minute, back and forth. Nobody gave an inch. Nobody compromised. Nobody listened. Just arguing, relentlessly. After 20 minutes I was exhausted, and I wasn't even participating. Then Valentine leaned forward. Perhaps we should settle this another way. The room froze. Actually froze. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Even I could tell that sentence was bad. Very bad. Marco's jaw tightened. Julian's eyes hardened. Interesting. Extremely interesting. I looked around, then raised my hand. Yes, like school. Again. Because apparently that's my brand. The entire room turned toward me. Valentine blinked. Julian closed his eyes. Slowly, like a man preparing for disappointment. What? Valentine asked. I frowned. Can I ask a question? Silence. Then... Sure. I pointed between both sides of the table. What do either of you actually want? The silence was immediate. Painful. Magnificent. Valentine stared. Julian stared. Marco stared. The advisors stared. Nobody moved. I continued, because apparently self-preservation remained optional. You've been arguing for 20 minutes. Silence. Nobody has explained anything. Silence. Nobody has listened to anything. Silence. You all sound like divorced parents arguing over a boat. One advisor physically turned away. His shoulders were shaking. The man was trying not to laugh. Valentine looked stunned. Stunned. Then, to everybody's horror, the old man started laughing. Hard. Not polite laughter. Real laughter. The room watched in disbelief. Valentine wiped his eyes, pointed at me, then looked at Julian. Where did you find him? Julian smiled. That stupid smile. The one reserved exclusively for me. The bakery. Valentine laughed harder. Then something incredible happened. The conversation changed. Not completely, but enough. For the first time all evening, people started talking instead of posturing, explaining instead of threatening, listening instead of yelling. I wish I could claim genius. I can't. I was just tired, very tired. The solution ended up being embarrassingly simple. No war, no violence, no dramatic showdown, just a compromise. A boring, reasonable, adult compromise which apparently nobody had considered. Wild. Absolutely wild. An hour later the meeting ended. Everybody stood. Hands were shaken. Deals were finalized. Nobody got shot. A massive success by Mafia standards. As we headed toward the exit, Valentine stopped me. The old man smiled, warmly, almost fondly, then said, "You know what your problem is, son?" I did not. "I had many problems. You'll need to be specific." Valentine pointed at me. "You're not afraid of any of us?" Silence. I blinked, then looked around, then back at him. "Oh," a pause. I thought everybody was exaggerating. The entire room burst out laughing, even Marco. The giant man actually laughed. I nearly asked somebody to document the occasion. Valentine shook his head, still smiling, then glanced toward Julian, and for the first time all night, his expression became serious. "You got lucky." The way he said it, not to me, to Julian, like a warning, like a compliment, like both. Julian's gaze found mine, softened immediately, and in that moment something clicked. Not about the Mafia, not about power, not about reputation, about us. Because for the first time since the bakery, I realized something. I hadn't accidentally wandered into Julian's life, and he hadn't accidentally wandered into mine. We had chosen each other. Again and again and again every day, despite all the reasons not to. An audience? That's when I knew I was never leaving, not the organization, not this ridiculous life, and definitely not him. Which is how, several months later, through a series of increasingly questionable decisions, I somehow became known as the Ghost of Wall Street, and trust me, that story is even more ridiculous. So, remember the opening? The whole Ghost of Wall Street thing. The criminal empire, the fancy office, the terrifying reputation, the grown men visibly sweating when I entered a room. Yeah, we should probably talk about that. Because audience? I did not become a Mafia consigliere through intelligence, or strategy, or ambition. I became a Mafia consigliere because apparently nobody else in the organization knew how. Calendars worked. I'm serious. 3 months after the Valentine meeting, I had somehow become indispensable. Not intentionally, never intentionally. It just happened. One day I was helping organize schedules. The next day people were asking my opinion. The day after that people were scheduling meetings with me. Me. A former bakery employee. I still don't understand it. The first time somebody called me boss, I almost threw a stapler. A man walked into my office. My office, which is already a ridiculous sentence, and said, "Boss, we have a situation." I immediately looked behind me, because obviously he was talking to somebody else. There wasn't anybody else, just me. The man waited, patiently. I pointed at myself. Me? Yes. Silence. No, absolutely not. I rejected the title immediately. I am not a boss. The man looked confused. You run half the meetings. I organize calendars. You settled 3 disputes this week. I color-coded spreadsheets. You convinced Valentine to negotiate. I asked a question. The man nodded thoughtfully, then said, "Exactly," and walked away. I still don't know what that means. Meanwhile, Julian found the whole thing hilarious. Deeply hilarious. Annoyingly hilarious. One evening I walked into his office carrying reports and found him smiling. Dangerous. Very dangerous. Because Julian only smiled like that when he was about to become a problem. What? His smile widened. I heard something. Never trust that sentence. Ever. What? Another smile. Were you threatening people again? Silence. A very important silence. I pointed immediately. I was not. I wasn't. They were being unreasonable. The man laughed, then pulled me into his lap, which, by the way, nearly killed me, because after months of waiting, the physical affection floodgates had eventually opened. And audience? It turned out Julian was affectionate the same way he did everything else. Completely, thoroughly, dangerously. The man acted touch-starved. I would stand up to get coffee and he'd look personally betrayed. It was ridiculous. I loved it. The reputation thing got worse. Much worse. One afternoon I overheard 2 younger associates talking. They didn't realize I was nearby. Big mistake. That's him. Again? That's him? The phrase haunted me. The second guy lowered his voice. The Ghost of Wall Street? I froze immediately. The what? The first guy nodded. They say he talks people into surrendering. Excuse me? I walked around the corner instantly. The 2 men nearly jumped through the ceiling. What did you just call me? Silence. Panic. Visible panic. One guy looked ready to resign. The other looked ready to fake his own death. Finally. Ghost of Wall Street. I stared, then laughed harder, then laughed even harder. Because that is the stupidest nickname I have ever heard. I worked in a bakery. I once cried because a customer complimented my muffins. What part of that screams criminal mastermind? Apparently all of it, according to them. The nickname stuck. Of course it did. These people refused to let things go. Soon everybody was using it. Quietly. Respectfully. Like it was a real title. Meanwhile, I was still trying to figure out why the office coffee machine had 3 separate buttons labeled emergency. Then one morning I walked into headquarters and immediately noticed something. Nobody was panicking. Nobody was shouting. Nobody was threatening anybody. The paperwork was organized. The schedules were running. The meetings were functioning. Everything worked. That was weird. Very weird, because chaos was the organization's natural state. I looked around suspiciously, then realized the truth, without meaning to, without planning to, without even noticing I'd helped build something. Not perfect, not clean, not exactly legal, but something. A place where people weren't constantly at each other's throats. A place where Julian wasn't carrying everything alone anymore. A place that somehow felt like home. And audience? That realization hit harder than any reveal in this story. Because home isn't always where you start. Sometimes it's where you end up. Later that night, Julian and I stood alone on the balcony of the penthouse. The city stretched endlessly below us. Lights, traffic, life. The same city where this entire disaster started. The same city where a bleeding stranger walked into my bakery and ruined my life. In the best possible way. For a while, neither of us spoke. The night air was cool. Comfortable. Quiet. And for once, there wasn't a crisis waiting. No rival families. No meetings. No emergencies. No warehouses. No paperwork. Just us. After everything we'd survived together. The silence felt different. Earned. Julian rested his forearms against the railing, looking out over the skyline. And for a moment I simply watched him. The profile I'd memorized months ago. The dark hair. The sharp jawline. The ridiculous face responsible for 90% of my bad decisions. God, I loved this man. The realization still hit me sometimes. Randomly. Like emotional whiplash. One minute I'd be thinking about spreadsheets. The next I'd remember Julian existed. And suddenly my day was ruined. In the best way. After a moment he spoke. Any regrets? Dangerous question. Very dangerous. I thought about the bakery, the baguette, Marco, the warehouse, the Mafia, the panic attacks, the emotional damage. Then I smiled. No. Julian looked over, softly, the way he always looked at me, like I was something precious, something worth protecting, something worth choosing every day. My chest tightened, because after everything, that look still affected me, still destroyed me, still made me feel like the luckiest idiot alive. Then he smiled, small, private, beautiful, and audience? That was my breaking point. Because suddenly I remembered every interrupted moment, every almost kiss, every museum disaster, every bookstore interruption, every stupid near miss, months of romantic torture. I pointed at him. Immediately. Julian blinked. What? No. A pause. No? No. He looked genuinely confused. Good, let him suffer. Just a little. The man owed me. Do you have any idea how long I waited? Silence. Then? For what? I stared. Actually stared. The audacity. The absolute audacity. For you. Understanding hit instantly. His ears turned red months later, still blushing. Unbelievable. I stepped closer. So let me get this straight. Julian looked nervous. Actually nervous. Interesting. You spent months staring at me. Silence. You spent months looking at me like I hung the moon. Silence. You spent months stopping yourself every time we got close. His jaw tightened. I stepped closer. Now there was barely any space between us. The city lights reflected in his eyes, and for the first time neither of us looked away. You made me wait through a restaurant. Silence. A museum. Silence. A bookstore. Silence. A criminal organization. His lips twitched. The criminal. The absolute criminal. Then his hand found my waist. Slowly. Carefully. Like he still couldn't quite believe he was allowed. My heart immediately forgot how to function. The teasing disappeared. The jokes disappeared. Everything disappeared. There was just him. Just us. And all the things we'd never said. His voice came out quieter. Lower. More vulnerable than I'd ever heard it. I was scared. That one sentence hit harder than the Mafia reveal. Because I knew. I knew exactly what he meant. Scared I'd leave. Scared he'd ruin me. Scared he'd lose the best thing that ever happened to him. I reached up, touched his face, and smiled. You idiot. A breathless laugh escaped him. Then I whispered, You never had to be. And audience, that was it. That was the moment. The one we'd been waiting for, the one the universe had interrupted approximately 17 times. Julian looked at me. Really looked at me. Like he was memorizing every detail. Then his hand tightened slightly at my waist, and he kissed me, finally. Not rushed, not hesitant, not uncertain. Months of tension, months of wanting, months of almosts. All of it crashed together at once. The city disappeared, the balcony disappeared. Everything disappeared. There was only him. His hand against my waist, my fingers tangled in his hair, the feeling of finally being exactly where I belonged. Worth it, every interruption, every near miss, every second of waiting. Worth it. When we finally pulled apart, neither of us moved very far. Foreheads touching, breathing hard, still smiling, and for the first time since the bakery, Julian looked completely at peace. Then I ruined the moment. Naturally. Because that's who I am. I looked him directly in the eyes and said, "You know, being covered in blood is still a terrible way to introduce yourself." The man actually laughed into my shoulder, and honestly, that might have been my favorite part. Because after all the chaos, after the Mafia, after the secrets, after everything, it was still us, just us, and somehow, that was enough. Anyway, that's my story, so tell me, would you have flirted with the bleeding goth stranger in the bakery? Or am I the only one with absolutely no survival instincts? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this disaster, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join the family. I'll see you in the next story, hopefully with fewer criminals. No promises though. The end.